Welcome back to another video here in the character modeling series, and we're going to be taking a look today at trying to merge these meshes together and also kind of set up our polygroups so that we're going to be better able to sculpt this thing moving forward. So currently, as we left off in the last video, I have two subtools here. I have the head that was separated in order to allow me to create a little bit more of a clean sculpt here and get a little bit more facial details. This mesh has been dynameshed. And then below I have the body, which has been ZBrushed and contains all of the Z-sphere topology that was in here. So what I'm going to do today is merge these two things together and then set up what is going to be my final polygroup setup. So there's a few things that are not so beneficial here because I did metacarpals and metatarsals in my character. I am at a point now where these don't work very well in terms of polygrouping. I've got some weird tarsal and carpal polygroups here as well. I've gone and inflated the hands so that I've got something a little bit cleaner, but in the end, I'm going to need that to work a little bit better. I also want to kind of help my face out a little bit here and try and get these things to mesh up in a little bit of a better way. So let's take a look at how we're going to do this. First, I'm going to be using the polygroup menu down here. Now, I have actually added a couple of shortcuts to my user interface up here that are going to allow me to kind of do this a little bit faster. And I'm also going to be using some polygroups, or some shortcuts rather, to assign polygroups. So number one, I'm just going to hit Control W or auto group. And what this is going to do is it's going to group everything together that is in a single contiguous mesh. So because all of these polygons touch one another, the entire mesh becomes one color. Control W will do the same thing here. We're getting random colors assigned as I do this, but Control W will assign what is currently visible on screen. So if there was a swatch missing, Control W will make the entire thing visible, whereas auto groups will still use contiguous polygroups. So that's not very useful to me. Now, it's also worth noting that assigning polygroups in this way does not manipulate your topology. Okay, we're just adding color to the polygons themselves. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go and mask out her neck. So the idea here is that I would like the head and neck to be on separate groups. So I'm going to go in and just kind of holding control, paint in a mask that is going to allow me to separate her neck from her head. With the mask painted, I will hit Control W on my keyboard to assign that to a new group. Now I can Control Shift and hide. We'll invert our selection here so that the neck no longer receives any of the polygrouping information. The next one I'm going to do is going to be the eyes. So I'm going to use a mask here as well to go and block in about where her eye socket is, something in that range. Control W again, we'll group that and we'll hide her eyes. I'm going to do the same thing with her muzzle. So this is kind of defining that round muscle of the mouth, the orbicularis oris. And I'm going to try to define that as its own polygroup. I want to make sure I don't get any of her nose in here. That would not be helpful. So we'll do this. And again, I'm going to hit Control W and we'll hide that polygroup. Speaking of her nose, that'll be the next one. I'm going to go and block this in. Like that. Again, trying to ensure that I have the entirety of this thing. We're going to go and trim this out just a little bit here, as I don't need that much of her cheek included in the nose. And we'll group that. Her ear, too, is another pretty good detail that could stand on its own. And so, again, I will go in and throw a mask down here. Control W to group that, and then we'll hide it. And then we can start kind of defining some of the other groups. So it would be nice to have her jawline here defined as its own polygroup. Now what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to look at where I'm going to want my topology down the road. And so that's kind of why this is being grouped in this way. And we'll paint this up in front of the ear here a little bit. And down like this. I want to keep this kind of one thickness, as it were. Without perspective, I'm actually going to try and crop this a little bit smoother. And we can go and do that. It was a pretty similar color here, but it was pretty different. Nonetheless, we'll do her cheeks here. So this is going to be just one group on its own. We'll just do this straight across that eye socket here too. And we'll remove that. I'm going to find the temporal line coming up and out of her skull and kind of in and around here. This is kind of going to define the side of her head versus the front of her head. I'll try and keep this fairly round here. We'll bring this all the way in, whoops, all the way in to below the ear. And so what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to separate her temples. Now, really what I'm thinking of when I do this isn't so much where I want these groups of color to go, but what it is instead is where I'm going to want my edge work to go. So in looking at the model like this, everywhere where you see a different group of color, I'm going to get edges that run in that direction when we retopologize this. And that's kind of what I'm after, is setting up the topology here in a way that it's going to work. The other thing that I might do here is put another loop around her face. So let's go and identify this green group, this purple group, and her cheek group. And what I want to do here is almost put a Lone Ranger mask on the model. This is also going to help create those really nice edge loops around her eyes. So something like that I can go and separate. We're going to go and just isolate that group and give it a different color here so it's a little bit more noticeable. Like that. So that's not too bad. That's going to help create those loops in her face in the way that I want them. It wouldn't be too bad as well to kind of split this up. And so I'm going to hold Shift, click, and then rotate. And what this is going to do is it's going to rotate using screen space, and I can go and, that's not what I wanted, draw a mask out here. Again, just to try and define a little bit better where I want those edges to go. Lastly is the group in her neck here, which isn't really all that useful. So we'll split that up into another group there, hopefully allowing the polygons to start going down her neck. So there, something like that. Again, this is not absolutely necessary to do this when you retopologize using ZBrush. I just like the results that I get better when I do this. Now, the groups in her body here are also pretty good. We're not going to be able to manipulate these too much until we actually get in and start editing the model. So I'm going to have to Z-remesh her, keeping these groups. The other thing that I need to do here is, because this is going to be a female character, I'm going to need to place breasts on her body. And so the way that I'm going to do that is by creating a new piece of geometry in the shape of a breast. I'll position it here, and I'm doing this after the fact because I want to make sure that I don't collapse her rib cage or alter the shape of that mesh. So this is going to sit on top of the body here. To do that, I'm going to go to my subtool, and I'm going to append a sphere. I can select that sphere, go to my Move, Scale, and Rotate tools, and we can go and position this a little bit better to be the shape of her breast. So I'm going to go somewhere about here. I'm going to try and keep the top of the breast around the armpit, and I'm going to make sure the bottom of the breast doesn't go in below her elbow. I'm going to also angle the breast to kind of match the angle of the rib cage here. This doesn't really matter so much because this is going to get retopologized. I just find it a little bit easier to see when I do this. Now I'm going to go into my Move brush, and I'm going to start kind of reconfiguring this a little bit to better match the shape of a human breast. So we'll mask out the bottom, and using Control and clicking, I can blur my mask. And then we're just going to go and pull the topology up into her chest here a little bit and kind of pull it back in like so. So I want to make sure that this is kind of matching the shape. And we're going to pull the side out a little bit here and that center in. I want to be careful that I don't pass the center mark here too much. Because if I do that, it's going to start merging the breasts together, which is not going to look as good as if they were separate entities. We're going to go and just, again, using a little bit of smooth here, kind of deflate the breast a little bit. And we'll turn off our wireframe so we can kind of see this without. It's not too bad. There's a little bit more roundness we can pull out of the bottom here. And again, I want to kind of squish that up as though it's encountering the solid mass of her rib cage and is deforming because of that. Her breasts should be malleable and therefore actually take on the shape of the object below. When I'm pleased with this shape, and I may go in and refine this at some point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head into my Z plugin subtool master, and I'm going to mirror this into a new object. Now we're going to keep this in one subtool. I don't need her breasts to be separate. And this is going to allow me to actually see them together. And I can see here that I'm a little further apart, I think, than I would like them to be. And so I'm just going to turn on symmetry. And then we can kind of pull them together a little bit more. And again, use that smooth a little bit to just make sure that we are very delicately kind of merging back into the shape of her torso. So again, just a little bit of smoothing here. Looking at them from underneath, I want to make sure that I get very natural shapes. Now, she's going to end up wearing clothing, and the shape of her breast is going to change as she wears the clothing. And so I want to be careful that I don't just go too far with making her body naked because, you know, again, her breasts are malleable. They're going to change shape once she's in clothing. So I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm going to leave the polygroups on them as is. And I now kind of have all the geometry I need here. So I'm going to go back to her body. I don't have any subdivisions in her body. So we're going to go and just bring this up one subdivision. And the idea now is that I need to kind of merge this down. We're going to delete the lower subdivision, so it's a little higher res. And I'm going to go and Z-remesh this before I do anything. Actually, let's Dynamesh it first to close both the hole in her neck, but also to merge together all of the metacarpals and metatarsals that were created. So I'm going to bring my resolution up to, we'll try 1500, and I'll Dynamesh. And I can see that that didn't work. Let's try that again, 1500. And then Dynamesh. That resolution isn't too bad. I am losing a little bit of shape here, but it's not the end of the world. Then what I can do is I can go in and better refine these polygroups. So to begin with, I'm going to go in and grab just the metacarpals section of her hand, which runs around like this. Make sure that's all of them. It looks like it's almost all of them. You can see that a part of her wrist here did not come along with them. And so I'm going to, if I can, angle my camera here to try and get a better view at her wrist. And I'm just going to hide those polygons like so. So this is going to be becoming her hand group. So I can just Control W like we did on the face to kind of merge this together. You can see I can even kind of remove some of the artifacting here from those Z-spheres that existed, and I'll bring that back. So there's now our hand group. I can see too that there's a couple of groups making up her wrist here. Again, just a few stray groups from when this was created. So I'm going to go and select those and make sure, let's make sure only her forearms are on screen, and we'll go and merge that. I need to do the same thing in her feet. Now here's the base ankle. And I'm going to use that, and we're just going to go and add to it now all of these other groups that exist. You can see there's one stray purple group and one stray blue group on the bottom. The rest all appear to be polygroups for her toes, which is okay. Again, I'll invert my selection and just merge this, and now I have a foot group. This should, if I go and look at her chest here, also kind of merged her neck together into one group. This is going to create a little bit of artifacting here if I were to merge this as it is now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my move brush and just go and pull this up. We'll tuck it in to that mesh of her head. Now when I merge these together, we should end up with a cleaner and completely merged shape. So that looks good. The polygroups of her breasts here are going to be okay. There is, however, this orange group here. If we're going to solo this, I probably don't need this once her breasts have been added to go up and in between her breasts. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the way that this grouping is done. I'm going to do this with both this blue group and this purple group, which are going to be her clavicles or her shoulders. and going to be her rib cage. So I'm going to group this whole thing, and then I'm going to turn off perspective. We're going to angle her rib cage a little bit better here, and I'm just kind of looking at about where the bottom of her bra strap would go around her back, and I'm going to group that. And that'll give me a little bit of a cleaner break here, a little bit of a cleaner group in and around her back. The same thing is kind of true here with her pelvis. I've kind of got a weird grouping here from how those polygroups were made. And so I can go and regroup them as such. And I may even want to bring this red group down a little bit, almost to where her waistline would be. Like so. And that'll work. And we'll just group that one. Okay, I'm a little bit more pleased with that now. I kind of have the groups that I want. So the idea now is going to be to merge this all together and then start remeshing it to get my polygroups the way that I want them. So under Subtool, I'm going to first take my mesh. I'm going to hold Shift and open geometry. I'm going to make sure there's no subdivisions here, no subdivisions here, and no subdivisions here. So perfect. So we're going to go to merge, and I'm going to merge down and hit OK, and merge down and hit OK. So we have the entirety of the mesh now in a single subtool. And now we can go in and we can start Z-remeshing this into the resolution that we want. Now, I want to make sure I don't lose any of the detail that I have on this model from its creation. And I'm going to need to actually merge these things together. So I'm going to need a Dynamesh first. So we'll keep our resolution and we'll just turn on the Dynamesh, which will merge everything together. We'll turn that off. And you can see that we've got a few stray groups here in her neck from where there was a little bit of overlap. And so we're going to go to our polygroup menu and we're going to go to merge stray groups. And this one may actually just need to be forcefully merged. So we'll go and do that. Okay, with this, we're now ready to Z-remesh. Before Z-remesh, I don't want to lose any of the details that I've got in the sculpt so far. While it is still kind of just blocky and not very good, the idea is that I don't want to have to start over and redo everything that I've done. So under my subtool, I'm going to duplicate this to create a clone. And we're going to come back and reuse that clone in a moment. Now, I'm going to go to Geometry, Z-remesh, and I'm going to set my target polygon counts to be somewhere around 15,000. We're also going to make sure that we keep groups. This is going to try and preserve the polygroups that are here. So I will turn on my wireframe so I can see the end result, and I'll hit Z-remesh. Now that I've Z-remeshed, a couple of things are worth noting. Her left pinky, which originally had only a single polygroup, has now taken on the polygroups of the opposing finger. This is because Z-remesh was done with symmetry turned on, thus duplicating the symmetry into this new model. The topology is now trying to go around her polygroups as best it can, and you can see that we have some polygroups here kind of helping us set up the topology of her face. They're not perfect, and in fact, we may want to Z-remesh this again using the same settings to try and get a little bit more out of this. In this case, we just lost too much detail, so we're going to leave it as is. I'm going to double check that our hands work okay, and they're all right. There is, again, some kind of ugly polygrouping in here, but for the process of lining up our first model, this should be okay. Everything is going to work well enough that we can sculpt anatomy now. As I said, I don't want to lose any of the detailing, which I've definitely lost in this model. And this is where that clone comes in. So I'm going to go and unhide the clone Currently, we have our new topology selected and the clone is just visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Subtool, Project, Project All. This is going to move all of the vertices of the new model, the retopologized version, until they line up more accurately with the topology of the old model. I can even subdivide and project again, and subdivide and project. This is going to be that sculpted into something a little bit more usable. Once we've got this done, we can delete the original Dynamesh model, and we should now have something that matches the shape pretty well of the original mesh, and now has topology that is ready to be sculpted in terms of the anatomy. So at this point, I would save my file as a new file, and I can use this as a new jumping off point. In the next video, we'll begin taking a look at sculpting the anatomy, a more finished version, into their model.